You're listening to the Brick by Brick Podcast, where we take you from the ground up on real estate investing. Join us on our entrepreneurial voyage through the world of flipping houses, managing rental property, and building a real estate empire.
All right, welcome back to the Brick by Brick Podcast. We have a very special episode today because this is the first episode where we have a special guest, and we're very excited to have Victor Liu here from Clear Skies Title. And I guess you're a title expert, I would say.
The title expert.
The title expert. Clear Skies is a local title company here in New Jersey, and we're super excited to geek out on all things title and title insurance, and all things that might flow from that conversation. I actually find this a fascinating topic, particularly as a lawyer and as an investor looking into the world of real estate. Maybe we can start, Victor, by just you introducing yourself and sort of who you are and how you got involved in the title industry.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having us. Thanks for having me and letting me, kind of share about this very, very esoteric topic that most people don't really talk about or know about, but it's actually a really critical piece of the real estate process. So, I'm really passionate about it. To give you a little background on myself, as you mentioned, I'm the owner of Clear Skies Title Agency. We're a title agency that's been around since 2015 actually technically 2014, but really started operating in 2015. Prior to that, I actually own a title searching company as well. And, if you think title insurance is something that not many people know about, even fewer people know about title searching. So behind every title policy, behind every title insurance policy is actually a title search that needs to be done. So that's where we started. We were there in every county in Jersey, just pulling deeds and mortgages. And that was actually, I've never really had a real 9-to-5 job. When I came out of college in 2007, that was kind of like the first foray into business. I went in with a partner, and we were servicing a lot of banks, a lot of foreclosure firms, a lot of foreclosure, outfits, some title agencies, and just, go into the county to make sure that they have the necessary data in order to make their title insurance decisions. In 2014, we saw an opportunity to get into the title insurance space and really to help people a little bit more directly with their real estate purchases. So that's kind of a little background on me in a nutshell.
Why don't we just start with the very basics? So Could you talk about what it is that a title company like Clear Skies does?
Yeah, be happy to. So Clear Skies is technically a title agency. There's actually a difference between a title agency and a title company. Before we get into that difference, to give a little background on how title insurance kind of started. So not many people know this, but title insurance as a concept was invented by Benjamin Franklin.
Wow.
Yeah. Of course it was Benjamin Franklin.
Add it to his long list of inventions.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan. We're here with Ryan also. I didn't mention that Ryan.
Ryan.
Yes, this should be a highly illuminating conversation.
The voice of God. Just kidding. I'm so sorry.
Yes,
Ryan,
we have a title expert here in Victor. We have a lawyer here in John, and we have a layman here in Ryan.
We also have Ryan. Ryan is
representing the common folk.
I'm so sorry. Ryan is also. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, good work. Okay, so way back in the day when United States wasn't even the United States, it was 13 colonies. All of the 13 colonies were owned by King George. So there's really not many problems with that. King George owned everything. When you lived on a piece of land, who owned that piece of land. From time to time, he would convey out little parcels of land to certain dukes or certain businessmen. But for the most part, to understand it, all the land, all the 13 colonies were owned by King George.
Was it a similar case in Britain at the time?
Well, yeah, of course, because King George owned everything, right?
So it wasn't any different because it was a colony as opposed to their.
Yep, it was just because he was the king, and he was just the king, and so as time went on, and then the United States, or I guess the Confederacy, and then the United States kind of formulated. When people wanted to transfer a piece of property, they would hire somebody called a conveyancer. And since everyone kind of lived in the same town for generations and generations, there wasn't really much need for any third-party validator of title, of ownership of the land. Because, my family's owned this piece of land since King George. And, you can kind of confirm that because, you've kind of lived in the same town, maybe your grandfather lived in the same town since the 13 colony days.
So everybody knew who owned the land.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
just knew. Okay.
So then as time went on, people started moving maybe, one town over or maybe one state over. And there became this need for kind of like this third party to actually examine the title records or examine the land records to see if that conveyance was actually being done by the rightful owner. Also, back in the day, when I said, I'm going to sell you this piece of land, Ryan, and I've owned it forever, and if I am lying to you, and if I'm lying to you about anything about this land, you can come beat me up because I'm still going to be in the same town. But now people are kind of moving out of the same state. They're moving to another colony or moving to another state. And, that ability to kind of chase somebody down was kind of lost. So, Benjamin Franklin, he, in all his wisdom came up with this concept of, hey, why don't we turn this into a type of insurance where, you don't rely on the seller to tell you the truth anymore. You actually rely on a third party insurance company who the buyer or the seller will pay for, and then they will assume the risk that maybe the seller is lying about something. So kind of the first real title company appeared in Philadelphia in, I want to say like 1868 or something like that. And then from there on out, this became the standard practice where either the seller would or the buyer would buy an insurance policy to make sure that, this piece of land that you're buying is going to be free and clear of any debts and is not going to have any baggage tied to it when you buy it.
What sort of documentation was available in like the 19th and 18th century to do that type of title search? Was there like a title records like there are today?
Interestingly, those records actually still exist. They're just handwritten. So whenever, let's say, John, you're going to sell a piece of property to Ryan, you would actually give him a deed, and then somebody else would take that deed. You'd bring it to the county recorder, and then the county recorder would actually transpose that deed, would rewrite that deed into this big tome, this big book. And, you can actually go to the county and, with enough effort, you can actually go and find a deed into King George. A lot of lawyers have them like framed on their walls and stuff like that.
Like a
cool
grantor
memento.
book, like a book of people.
Yeah, grantee book. So that's where all the deeds are in these big. I mean, nowadays everyone's spoiled and everything's computerized. But when we do title searches, we often have to go back to these books. Obviously, not all the way back to the 1700s, but we have to go back, to the point where it's handwritten books.
So to be clear, before the concept of title insurance existed, property was still conveyed by way of a deed. And then after that, when Benjamin Franklin realized the potential for this innovation, the title insurance process was the additional layer of protection on top of the existing practice of conveying property by way of a deed.
Yeah, technically a deed is just it's a document, but it really doesn't necessarily have to mean anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if, let's say a man gets married, a man owns a piece of property, he gets married, and then his wife comes and lives in the property. She has a possessory interest in the property, and if you were to pass away, she would probably inherit that piece of property. But oftentimes you deed it into her just to make it clear that she's also an owner of this property, right? It's oftentimes that deeds are used for clarification purposes, not necessarily to transfer anything. So I guess that therein lies the difference between the terms deed, which is a document, and title, which is actual ownership. So if I have title to something, I might not even have a deed. It's very challenging to have title without a deed, but you really, really need title, and you don't necessarily need a deed.
And that therein lies the ambiguity, which necessitates the need for title insurance.
That's one of the pieces why you would definitely need title insurance. Why people do need title insurance is because, a deed, just because you have a deed doesn't necessarily mean you have title, and, all the challenges come with that.
I wanted to return back to something you said very initially, which is that there's a difference between a title company and a title agency.
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that.
Could you talk about that?
Okay. So back in the history, so they started creating title companies. So these title companies are the insurance companies that would insure title. So when you buy a piece of property, you get a title policy. And if there's anything that would kind of challenge your title or your ownership of that property, then you can file a claim with the title company. In New Jersey, there's actually not that many title companies that sell directly. So in New Jersey, oftentimes there are a lot of these title agencies that actually win the business. They develop the relationships with the people that are buying title, and then they're the ones that are actually underwriting it, meaning they run all the title searches, they examine the title searches, and then they actually do the work of clearing title. But at the end of the day, if there is a claim, it's very rarely the title agency that you file a claim with. You file a claim with the parent title company. The title companies that exist in Jersey, most of them are, really, really big, national companies, Fortune 500 companies that, kind of underwrite across the country. And so they might not have as many boots on the ground in New Jersey to actually have that familiarity with each county and all the county records. So they rely on these agencies to do a lot of that, the legwork. But then at the end of the day, you're backed by this really solid, rock solid, bigger corporation behind you.
So the company is the company that gets paid the premium. Is that how it works? Like the company receives the money?
So the agency receives the money, and then they remit a portion of a percentage of that money to the company.
And in the event of a claim, do you go through the agency who then passes the risk back along to the title company, or do you go directly to the person who carries the risk, the title company?
You can go either way. Any decent agent that's providing service will can help you file that claim with the company. But most importantly, all the contracts that are written and prepared by the agent, and the agent has authority to sign those documents and to issue those documents. But all those documents are actually contracts between the insured and the insurance company. So the agency in between has certain responsibilities to the title company, but doesn't necessarily have the responsibilities to the actual insured.
So almost like an insurance agent might have like a State Farm franchise, but State Farm is the company that actually insures it, even if the agent has their own, Bob Jones State Farm agent or whatever.
Exactly. That's exactly how it is. A little bit of difference between a regular, like let's say a State Farm is that, a State Farm is probably just kind of is probably not underwriting it as much, right? So they kind of pass along the specs to the State Farm corporate, and the State Farm corporate comes back with a premium. Whereas as a title agent, we actually have to do a little bit more of the legwork.
So the agent has underwriting standards that are imposed by the company, or that the agent finds acceptable?
So no, that we signed an agency agreement with the title company saying that we have to comply with certain underwriting regulations or requirements.
Does all of the risk then fall on the title company, or does the title agency retain any risk?
The risk is not with the insured. The risk lies between the title company and the agent. So we as an agent the title company could come after us as an agent if they feel like we were negligent in underwriting, in issuing that contract. So
does that ever happen?
Has it ever happened? Not to us, but it happens all the time.
If you're a title agency, do you issue title on behalf of multiple title companies? Or
yes. We write for 3 different title companies. The biggest one in the country is Fidelity, or the Fidelity family of companies. It includes Fidelity Chicago. They're definitely the biggest title insurance company in the world, actually. And then we also write with Westcor and WFG.
How do you make the decision about which title company you're issuing a policy on behalf of?
Well, it's whoever we write the original commitment with. So that's the first contract. The commitment is the first contract, and then the policy will follow the commitment. There's a couple of differences, like it depends. Each insurance company has their own kind of palette. So there are some situations where one title insurance company may not want to insure, or might, have a more rigorous underwriting process, whereas another company will be more palatable for those types of deals. So that's something to be mindful of. Very, very rarely, do we find something where they kind of disagree. But from time to time, maybe their way of underwriting it will be slightly different.
In New Jersey, are there state laws that govern this practice? Like, are there things that, are you mandated to have a certain amount of coverage, or to offer a certain amount of coverage, or certain, minutiae of the policy that the state governs?
And don't costs fit into that?
Yeah. So first of all, title insurance companies are regulated in New Jersey by the Department of Banking and Insurance, as well as any other, most other insurance types of insurance in New Jersey. In order for you to be established as a title insurance company in New Jersey, you have to have a certain amount of reserves in case you go go out of business. You have to, there's you have to file all these forms. Every form has to be approved by the I don't know, probably Department of Banking Insurance, or every contract that you use needs to be regulated. All the fees and charges are all regulated, and you have to have the basis for them. So you can't just say, "Oh, we're a new insurance company in town, and we want to charge this much more." You actually have to present to the Department of Banking Insurance saying, "Hey, we want to charge this much, and this is what our actuary said the risk is, and it's very commensurate with the actual risk." And then you have to get those fees approved. So, just a little example, I guess a few years ago, the title search, the county search portion, was a cost for title agencies. So, meaning that we could not charge the consumer for our cost of running a county search.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just kind of a cost of doing business for us. A few years ago, the insurance companies, the insurance lobby, got it approved that the county search could be a pass-through cost. So not only is the insured or the borrower or buyer paying us the premium, but now they're paying for the county search as well, instead of that being just on the title agency. Why that actually matters, to get into the nitty-gritty of it, is it used to be that some insurance agencies would not give the client the county search, right? And the reason is, if there was a mistake with the county search, if you don't have the county search, you don't know that the agent actually made a mistake on the county search. But they would say, you're not paying for a county search. You're paying for a title policy, not for the county search. So, we gave you the policy. Now, you can't rely on the search, because they wouldn't even give you the search. But now, since the pass-through cost, now that search is being done on behalf of the client, and so the client actually has a rightful claim on that search too. So they could say, "Oh, look, give me the search, and look, you made a mistake on the search."
Wow, interesting. I wanted to go back to something you said a few minutes ago, which is the concept of clearing title as a responsibility of the agency. Can you describe what that means or what that is?
Yeah, so that's actually the bulk of what we do, and this is one aspect of title insurance of title insurance that's very, very different from other insurances. So in title insurance, we are very, very active in mitigating risk. So let's say you're buying life insurance and you're a smoker. Well, the life insurance company is either going to choose to insure you or not insure you, or they're going to charge you a lot more on your premium or charge you a lot less on your premium based on the fact that you're a smoker. What the life insurance company is not going to tell you is to stop smoking. For title insurance, it's very different, because we will say, "Hey, look, there is a mortgage and a judgment on title that I can clearly see is on title. So I will require that the seller, it's my job to make sure that the seller pays off that mortgage and pays off that judgment prior to the buyer buying that policy." So that's, the agent in a title insurance agency is much, much more involved in mitigating risk than any other type of insurance.
So clearing title in this context means ensuring that the seller has resolved all the liens or mortgages or other open issues that are in the seller's control prior to the transaction happening.
Yep. So the whole point or the way title insurance works is that every buyer should buy a property and buy a title policy with a fairly as clean of a slate as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that means anything the seller has to do to address any of their debts, or if we uncover any prior owner debts or prior owner issues, boundary disputes, anything that title insurance would cover, which I guess is going to lead to another question, but anything that title insurance would cover, we try to make sure that all those things are addressed prior to that title insurance policy being bound.
Given that you teed it up so nicely, what types of things does title insurance cover?
It covers a whole slew of things. Examples I often give are fraud. So, John, if you sell a property to Ryan sells property to me. If John didn't actually own that property and he committed an act of fraud, well, by the time I buy it, then I might not actually be buying anything, because the chain of title is fraudulent. An example of that fraud would be some form of forgery. So let's say, again, John, you're forging somebody else's name to sell the property to Ryan, and then I buy the property from Ryan. Again, even though Ryan had no idea, now that I own this property, or I don't actually own, as a clear title claim. Other kind of esoteric things would be like unknown heirs. So, if somebody were to pass away and the property passes to 3 of their heirs, and then it gets sold and sold again, but turns out that person actually had 4 children and one child that nobody knew about. That 4th child would have an interest in the property, and that would end up in a title claim.
So how does a title claim like that ultimately play out? Does it generally resolve by way of like a monetary payout, like a monetary settlement?
Yeah, it could. It could also play out with a DNA test, right? You might have to prove that you're a child. It could be some sort of quiet title action. I guess it's not super common that it's like an unknown heir. It would maybe be a let's say somebody were to pass away and they leave it to 3 children, but then one of those children would challenge the validity of the will, saying, "Hey, I should have, gotten the entire property, right? And this will was never probated, XYZ, for whatever reason, I should get a larger share." Well, then you can quiet the quiet title, their interest in that property, stuff like that. There's some.
Is it the title agency or company's responsibility to hire legal counsel to do that? Or would you essentially say to the owner, "Here's some money, you hire an attorney"?
Generally, the insurance company will retain an attorney on behalf of the insured.
Mm-hmm.
And that's generally what most title claims are court fees and legal fees.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily, "Hey, you've suffered a loss, let me shell out money to cover that loss." It's more so, "Hey, let me come up with the money to hire an attorney to help you defend against that claim, that challenge to your title."
I would guess that given that the cost of title insurance is relatively low, that these claims are pretty rare. Is that the case?
Yes, they are rare. And the reason they're rare is because a title agency is spending a lot of time mitigating that risk,
Mhm.
right? So they would 99.5% of the titles that I examine have some sort of title defect.
Mhm.
But most of those title defects are very, very easily resolved. Like, for example, the seller has to pay their mortgage, right? Or the seller has to pay taxes. Because we are so involved and there's such an active effort to make sure that title is clean by the time the buyer takes title, there are very few claims.
I guess I'm curious a little bit about the process of clearing title and examining title, because Ryan and I have bought a lot of properties that I would say have complex title issues, because they've
Hairy,
been
some might say.
hairy title issues. So they've been foreclosed on, or we foreclosed on them, and we've even had situations where we've been selling a property, and different buyers will have their own different title agencies, and the different title agencies will find different things or not find different things or impose different exceptions. And we've bought properties that have there's like a one in Connecticut that had a mortgage from like 1970 or something like that was for $3,000 that was never closed, and all sorts of weird stuff. I wonder, it seems to me just from those experiences that the records of some of these properties are very messy. Is that something that you encounter where you just look through a title abstract or report and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like this is insane"? Or
I wouldn't say it's super common, but it does happen from time to time. By nature, examining title can be kind of challenging. Number one, it's very, very democratized, meaning, every county records things a little bit differently. Every county holds their own records. So, we've dealt with title that kind of borders between 2 counties, and some documents are recorded in one county, and then maybe the deed is recorded in one county, but the mortgage is recorded in a different county. And then you have to imagine that these county clerks' jobs are fairly challenging, fairly high pressured. And so, mistakes do happen quite a bit, and, that kind of stuff. And, you're getting documents all day long from all different directions. And the references to the property, some of them might say, 100 Main Street, but then it's actually 100-102 Main Street. So actually indexing it against the right property or indexing it against the right mortgage can be challenging as well. So let's say a discharge comes in for that $3,000 mortgage from 1970, either it never got recorded or it never got sent, or maybe it got indexed against a different mortgage and now it's just lost in the nethers of the land record. So, I think by nature, a lot of investors, a lot of fix and flippers might encounter properties that maybe have more title issues than others. You have to imagine, a lot of properties that have changed hands more often will have fewer title issues because there's more opportunities to clear those issues up. Properties that have been in family for maybe 70 years, right? Or maybe have passed through some sort of death situation. Those are going to have more title issues because nobody's looked at it for, X amount of years.
I would have thought about it the other way, where the more it changes hands, the more things are going
more
on and the more,
complexity.
that would be increased complexity. But I could see, I assume the idea is that each successive time it changes hands, that that esoteric mortgage from 40 years ago has been either discharged or they've been able to index it. And did those records pass on from sale to sale or from transfer to transfer? So if I buy a property from John and then sell that property to you, does the title policy that you have at all reflect what I received when I bought it from John?
So in New Jersey, there is something called the interagency indemnity. Basically, if I hold the previous policy, it will cover a lot of different title issues before I insure it again. Meaning, let's say there's this 1970 mortgage, but it's already been insured over one time. If I hold that policy, then I can insure over it one more time. And if that mortgage were to ever become an issue, then I can go back and I can go to the previous title company, and then it'll be their responsibility. If it's not one of these, it's not one of those situations where it is covered under this agreement, then I can get something called an indemnity letter from the previous title company, so that again is saying, hey, I insured this before. I recognize that there's this problem. If this problem ever rears its ugly head, you can come back. You can come back and call me about it.
Can you talk a little bit about the actual nuts and bolts of the title search itself, like actually retrieving documents? Because I've always been fascinated by how that is done, because I'll get these big title packets and they'll just be crazy copies of microfilmed weird stuff from 100 years ago, and I have no idea where these documents are and how they find them and who finds them.
Yeah, so it's a whole world out there as far as title searching. First thing most people don't know is, you think that you can just plug in an address and then all the land records for that address pop up. But land records are actually indexed by name. So I would have to search Victor Liu to find all the documents that relate to me. So the first thing you would have to do is find, you have a subject property, 100 Main Street, and you have to find out who the owner of that property is. So you find out who the owner is. Now you search Victor Liu. I'm the owner of this property. Okay, Victor Liu bought it from Ryan Goldfarb. So next you have to search out Ryan Goldfarb and look at all the mortgages Ryan Goldfarb once took out. Now, if Ryan Goldfarb owned one property, it's very easy to look through all his mortgages. But, if you find, let's say it was previously owned by, the US DEP or US EPA, you can imagine that you're going to have thousands and thousands of records under that name, and you have to sift through them to find out which documents actually pertain to the property that you are doing. One major issue in New Jersey is New Jersey Transit actually used to own a ton of, and still does own a ton of property. And, to be able to search out New Jersey Transit can be really, really extensive project. And that's from time to time, as a title searcher, you're going to encounter some of these New Jersey Transit projects.
Is that the type of task that falls on the title agency, or is that on the search company?
Yeah, that would be on the search company. A lot of people will go, since not many people know about the search industry, a lot of people go to the title agencies with some of these projects. But the title agencies really make money when they insure title. So if there's sometimes you just need to do this project and there's no insurance involved. But either way, the agency is going to hire a search company to kind of run that out. Back to the search aspect of it, it's actually underwriting guidelines that we search back the chain of title for 60 years. So that sometimes that can be easy, right? So it could be one person owned it for 60 years and then you find one deed and you're good. Other times, a property could have been sold 10 times in 60 years, could have been sold 20 times in 60 years. And then you have to retrieve every single one of those deeds and then run each of those owners for any judgments, mortgages, liens they might have put on the property while they owned it. All this is generally done at the county courthouse, where all these records are kept. And then, like we mentioned at the beginning, at the top of the show, is that we, sometimes this could involve going into the books, instead of the computers, and, and then you start making photocopies of these books. In Bergen County, I remember, a lot of it was on microfiche. So you actually have to go through the microfiche to find, to actually generate these copies of these documents so that we can present it to the title agency so that they can examine it, review it, find any possible issues that need to be addressed, and then clear that up before
So a title search company will have people that work in, say, every county in New Jersey, like one person that's like, hey, this is your job. Whenever we need help in whatever Bergen County, you go to the courthouse. Or do they have like freelance people, or is it?
both exist. So there are freelance people that, are just in, say, Essex County. So some title agencies will hire those, solo guys in Essex County. That art is slowly being lost. There's not many people becoming title searchers these days. It's becoming a little bit more consolidated into a few bigger companies, and they will employ searchers to go to these counties as opposed to like the one guy. Just 10 years ago, it was probably 70% those solo guys and 30% companies. Now it seems to be like 80% companies and 20% solo guys. So it is a little bit sad because there's a ton of knowledge that's kept, like these guys have been in this county forever and done, thousands and thousands of searches. They probably know the land records better than most people. And that art is kind of being lost as they start to retire and, kind of get out of that industry.
I'd actually encourage people to go to the county records and go try to search things yourself. I did that once, and I got a little bit of an inside view into the world that you were just describing. Because as soon as I walked in, I felt like such an outsider because everyone there was talking. They were talking to each other as if they see each other every day, which I'm sure they do. And they're asking about their family. What are you doing this weekend? Everyone was real buddy with each other, and they were all just cranking through these searches, many of which they've probably done multiple times already. But some of the issues that you alluded to having on the search end, I witnessed firsthand when I went in there and thought I was going to be doing a very straightforward search and realized that there were like 5 or 6 layers to the search that I had completely underestimated, like the different names and the different references to a property address, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, going into the county land records, it's like going into like some of these like a library from like Harry Potter or something. It's definitely like entering a world from a different time, and it's really cool. And I'm glad to have experienced that, and to still be doing that. I mean, obviously a lot more. There's now these rooms have a lot more computers and a lot more digitized, and that's good. It's a lot more efficient that way. But I still think of it as an art, and I certainly appreciate what the people that actually do this kind of work.
I wonder if we could talk about title from the perspective of an investor or a real estate owner occupant. I guess in my mind, I think of title insurance as a sort of absolute requirement. I've very rarely heard of people transferring property, except if it's like husband to wife or something like that, without getting a title insurance policy or going through that process. Is that your opinion also, or have you found that? I'm just trying to think if I know of transfers that happen without title insurance.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask it. It seems like a straightforward question, but obviously when doing an arm's length transaction, that's going to necessitate title in almost any situation, unless some instances that we've seen with like REO type stuff or foreclosures. But yeah, if you're for like the kind of like intra-family transfers or a quitclaim, does that necessitate title?
Sometimes. So I have to tread carefully because I'm not an attorney, so I can't actually tell you if your coverage would lapse or not. That's technically the reading of a contract and to the comprehension of a contract and to explain a contract, which I'm not actually allowed to do without a law license. That being said, I can count on one hand how many times somebody has not purchased a owner's title policy when they are buying from somebody they don't know. I can recount one example very vividly where, we went all the way to the closing day, and at the closing table, they said, "Oh, I actually don't want owner's title insurance. Can you take that part off?" And, for me, it doesn't make a ton of sense to do that because he was getting a loan. So
he had a lender policy, not an owner's policy.
Absolutely. So there's 2 types of policies: owner's title policy, which insures the homeowner and the home buyer, and lender's title policy, which protects the lender that's actually putting up most of the money for you to buy that property. So they actually have more skin in the game generally than you do. So lenders will always force a borrower, or will always require that a borrower buys a lender's policy to protect them when they lend you money. So the great thing about title, or the great thing about when you're doing this, is when you buy an owner's policy and a lender's policy together, it's called a simultaneous issue, owner-lender policy simultaneously. And it's actually buy one, get one free, or buy one, get one for like 10%. So oftentimes, if you're buying like a $300,000 home and you are getting a $250,000 loan, the amount that you pay for your full coverage, full owner's title policy coverage is only a couple $100. Whereas if you were to buy a standalone owner's policy, it could cost a couple $1,000s. So, for a couple $100, if you're already paying, $1,800 for a couple $100, you get all the coverage of a $2,000 policy, you should do it. But I recount one time where at the closing table, he said, no, I really don't think I need this. And so I had to cut a new check to refund him that, the couple $100 and drive it up to Bergen County to make sure that, obviously he left satisfied, not buying owner's title insurance. So I remember that very vividly because both I and his attorney were trying to convince him, really, it's not worth this $200 is not worth it. You're getting a $2,000 product.
What was his rationale for not doing it?
He just didn't think he needed it.
Not spending $200.
Yeah, he just didn't feel like he needed it, and he didn't think that there'd be title issues. And I mean, fortunately, I don't think I've ever heard from him again, which is a good thing, and I'm glad that's the case. But for a measly $200, it's probably worth it for that $2,000 value.
I feel like we're nearing the end here. But I had a few maybe quick hitter type questions. If we could try to get a quick response to it. If you need a second to think about it, that's totally fine. So what is not covered by title insurance?
Zoning issues, anything that is accepted on the title policy. So on title policy, there will be a page that says exceptions. Anything that is listed on there would not be covered by the title policy. Anything that happens after the effective date of the title policy. So anything that you knew about before you bought the property, so anything you had knowledge of, would not be covered by title policy.
For any other questions, feel free to reach out to Victor Liu at...
Can I ask one question? I don't want to interrupt your rapid fire, but I do have always wondered this. So for exceptions on a title policy, will a title company or agency always write a policy subject to whatever exception? Like, for example, say that there are clouds in the title or issues that just cannot be resolved. Will you still write a policy and just say, okay, subject to this exception? Or there are some titles you say, no, I just cannot insure it under any circumstances?
There are some titles that we will not insure, that we will not
tax
insure.
Stuff,
if the title issue is big enough, we will not.
If you wrote an exception, you'd say never.
Yeah, the exception is bigger than the policy. So an attorney kind of explained this to me, but like if you are basically selling something that means nothing. So this title policy will ensures your ownership, except in the case that you don't own it. Basically, I've sold you a piece of paper that says nothing.
Sure.
Right. So if the exception is too big, it wouldn't be right for me to sell you that policy.
Okay. But except for that, everything else would be sort of accepted out in that section. You'd say, except for this, except for that, I'll still write you the policy. Maybe the exceptions are very significant, but I'll still write you the policy.
Yeah. I mean, as long as it's not so significant that, again, I'm selling you something that's worthless.
Does title insurance expire?
It does not expire. It lapses. So it will last for as long as you or your heirs own the piece of property. But it will lapse if you sell the property to somebody else, or if you voluntarily transfer it to somebody other than your spouse. So if you transfer it to your kids, your title insurance expires. If you were to pass away and the property passes to your kids, then the title insurance stays in force.
Can you just briefly explain the concept of a chancery abstract?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that we get a lot from investors. Anytime a property has been through foreclosure, basically, in most cases, all the transfers have been voluntary. So if a previous owner says, oh, I didn't really mean to sell that to you, you can say, well, you signed that deed. You really don't have an argument. But in the case of foreclosure, that property actually got taken away from somebody. So that person that the property got taken away from, they still have a lot of rights and they are aggrieved. So it's possible they could bring an action in court to try to get their property back. So a chancery abstract makes sure that even if they were to bring an action in court, even if they were to challenge the foreclosure, the foreclosure process is so buttoned up enough that they probably won't win in court. So we order something called a chancery abstract, where we go into the chancery court in Trenton. We pull all their records to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed in the foreclosure process. Most importantly, that that the person that owned the property was notified that they were about to lose the property, because that's the biggest thing. If you had fair warning and you still didn't fix the problems, you still come current on your mortgage, then you really don't have much of an argument. But oftentimes, people make mistakes and they never get served. So then they lose their property without even knowing it.
We're familiar with that. Not from the mistakenly not being served, but from the opposite side of that.
What are some of the most, or what's the most common misconception that you see about title insurance or the title process?
One big misconception that, is that it's very simple. You plug in an address and out spits out a title policy. Misconception probably exists because of other types of insurance where you just give a bunch of, profile type information and then they can kind of spit out, how much that would cost. But the amount of work that goes into writing a policy is actually pretty extensive. And then, I think generally people just don't understand title at all or don't even realize that title is something that they're buying in the closing process. They write this big check and then they kind of go through everything very quickly. They don't realize that they're actually, buying this product from this company. And that's something that they should, really think hard about and, maybe shop around for.
I guess there's this whole other concept of what a title agency does, which we didn't talk about, is they sort of act as the middleman, like almost like the escrow agent for all these, the settlement agent for all of these transactions, at least in New Jersey. And I think that's from our perspective, that's a big value add for a title company, because obviously a seller and a buyer will often have an attorney or have their own interest, but the title company usually, even though it's usually paid for by the buyer or arranged by the buyer, sort of sits in the middle, kind of coordinating all these things, which is itself a huge value add that you're paying for also when you get a title policy.
There's a fee for that, right?
Yeah, there's a settlement fee. Which is, basically, it's crazy that prior to 2015, I would say probably 90% of settlement was done by attorneys. And then in a very, very quick and short amount of time, I would say 95% of settlements are now being done by the title agencies. Mm-hmm. It's been a very, very huge paradigm shift in how the real estate closing process looks like. Yeah, so in New Jersey, we do act as settlement agent. It's becoming a bigger and bigger piece of every title agency's kind of expenses. So I guess 10 years ago, you would probably say the highest paid role in a title agency is the examiner, the title agent, the title officer. These days, you'll see that the settlement officer is actually becoming a more expensive role that you have to fill as a title agent, because that's become much more expensive and important piece of what we do.
It's strange too, because it's different in different states. I know in Connecticut, where we've purchased properties, it's very different. Attorneys, I think, do all the settlements, and they're also sort of simultaneously title agents or something like that. I don't know. It's like,
yeah, they're like the title. I don't know if it's the examiner, but I don't think we even spoke to a title representative last time we closed.
Well, I think the title representative was the attorney.
Right.
Yeah. Every state is really, really different. New Jersey is kind of interesting because it's close to both Pennsylvania and New York. So northern New Jersey follows the New York model, where people still hire attorneys, and attorneys used to do the settlement. Whereas southern New Jersey followed the Pennsylvania model, where nobody would use an attorney, or if they used an attorney, this title company was still the settlement agent.
Yeah, when we buy property in Atlantic City, very rarely are attorneys involved, but in North Jersey, always.
Yeah, and in Iowa, they don't even have title insurance, or at least it's state insured.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
interesting.
Wild Midwest.
Yeah. One last question: if there's one thing you could change about the title process, what would it be? Take your time.
Okay.
Except you have a call in 4 minutes.
I wish that the information needed to insure title was all more public. In order for us to insure a title, we have to gather data from so many different sources. We have to go to the county land records, which we talked a lot about. We have to get tax records from the tax collector or a tax service company. We have to get judgment searches from the superior and district courts, which is provided by another third-party vendor. We have to get Patriot searches, which is provided by you. Basically, we have to amalgate so many different pieces of data from so many different sources that we have to pay so much for, because they're oftentimes kind of controlled by these data companies. And all of this should be public data, but it's very monopolized by a few companies, and that cost actually gets passed on to the home buyer, making title insurance more expensive than it should be. Being that this is all public record, it should be a lot more efficient than it is, and I just see that as a unnecessary inefficiency.
From your mouth to government's ears.
I have one last question, and I know we have only a few minutes.
Cool.
I've always been wondering, from the perspective of someone intimately involved in this, Do you have any sort of weird or crazy story that where title insurance came into play? Like I'm trying to conceive of how I'm fascinated by these weird title issues and weird legal issues. Do you have any weird incident that happened that comes to mind and like, wow, I've never seen this before, never will see it again, that happened with a title policy or a title claim? I know they're rare, so maybe there aren't many to choose from.
Yeah, I remember in this industry, you encounter all sorts of people and all sorts of properties. We see a lot of fraudulent. I'll give you a good example. There was a property, it was a short sale, and then the mortgage got paid off. The mortgage, we had a payoff statement from the lender. We paid it off. Everything looked good. But turns out like there was a rogue person at that lender, that lending institution, that was getting paid outside, paid, outside of the normal protocol in order to issue, fraudulent discharges.
Wow.
And it was a smaller bank, so they weren't like, keeping track of their mortgages that well or their loans that well. But, this mortgage was discharged for 2 years prior to the actual owner of that lender realizing that, this was going on. And he didn't find out based on his bank account. He found out because I guess this rogue employee, who was also his niece, was like bragging about it to the other employees about how she's getting paid $10,000 per discharge that she was issuing.
Wow.
Getting rid of these mortgages. So yeah, so that money
seems
never
like
made
a criminal issue as well.
Oh yeah,
For sure.
We actually encounter a good amount of that kind of stuff.
Well, this has been fantastic. This is maybe my favorite episode. I'm just fascinated by this.
Yeah,
So
I love the authenticity of when you hear a question that excites you. It's visible.
That's
Victor,
fun for me too.
if
Thanks,
people
guys.
want to get in touch with you or with Clear Skies, how would they do that?
Yeah, so we have a really cool website where you can kind of calculate the cost of title immediately. The website is www.clearskiestitle.com. Skies is SKIES. Yeah, so check it out. We have a cool video repository there too, so you can learn more about this kind of stuff. And, just it's chock full of data. So come check us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you to Ryan, who I didn't introduce initially, but has been here the whole time.
Thank you for the belated introduction.
Of course.
Thanks for the
Victor,
opportunity, guys.
Thank you guys for listening. And please feel free to follow us on your favorite podcast app or website. And we'll be back soon with another episode. Thank you.
All right, it's been fun. Thanks.
Don't forget to visit us at brickxbrickrealestate.com for free content to help you along your real estate journey and to follow along on our projects. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app and engage with us online via Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and brickxbrickrealestate.com. See you next time on the Brick by Brick Podcast.